My name is Susan Schoenberger. I'm the Director of Communications at Hartford Seminary, and I want to welcome you all to the Zoom session today. Just a quick kind of recap of how we ended up here. We decided as soon as we went to all online instruction in the middle of March that we would try to do some webinars for our community, but for the extended community as well, people who might be interested in what we do at Hartford Seminary, people who could use the expertise of our faculty members. And we found out very quickly that there was a real need for these kinds of webinars. So I'm going to just mention to you all that we are going to be recording today's webinar. I will be able to share that with you afterwards. We'll send it to the whole list. That includes people who are on today and also the people who registered but weren't able to make it. There were well over 80 people who registered, so we have quite a big group. Because we have this big of a group, we're going to ask that people put their questions in the chat, and we'll be able to monitor that as we get to the Q&A portion. We'll kind of figure out the best way to do that. I hope you all understand that this is all on the fly. We might have glitches here and there. That's pretty typical, but I think everyone's been very patient with how these sessions tend to go. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you that your host today is the Reverend Dr. Michael Piazza, who is our faculty associate in congregational renewal. Mike is kind of the guy to talk about this issue. He's been doing this for many, many years. He is an expert in keeping churches going and improving them and in bringing them up to speed. And we're just very lucky that he's part of Hartford Seminary. We are grateful that he volunteered to be here today. And we hope you all get a lot out of this session. So now I'm going to turn it over to Mike, and he can take it away.
Thanks, Susan. Okay, so what I want to do is, there's about a half dozen of you who have taken classes from me, so you know that I'm sort of the audio AV guy, the PowerPoint person. So what I'm going to do is share my screen with you and go through a PowerPoint presentation as quickly as I can, that I hope will cover answer a lot of your questions. And then at the end, we'll have time for questions. But if things come up for you as we go through, if you'll just write your question in the chat box, that would be easier, because it looks like they're gonna be 50 or so people. And so all of us kind of trying to ask questions might be difficult. I prefer that, but that may be difficult. The other thing I just would say is that we're going to be going through a PowerPoint presentation. So what you're doing is watching my computer's PowerPoint, and then it's being translated through. So there are delays, and those of you who are doing worship online right now probably really understand that a lot of these things are just simply beyond your control. So I apologize that it doesn't look as professional, if it doesn't look as professional as it should, because this is, of course, what I teach, so it should look professional, but there you go. All right, well, let's see if we can get to share my screen with you and make sure you all see it. There we go, and start from the beginning. So there we go. So this fall, when I was looking at what I was going to teach this fall, I had originally wanted to teach a class about death and dying and grieving, and using the Christian and Jewish and Muslim rituals to sort of help churches and people deal with that. When this all happened, the school said, okay, we need to be prepared in the fall to teach whatever we do online. And I thought that particular class would be challenging to teach online, because I think for us to deal with death and dying, those kinds of issues, we have to deal with them with ourselves, our own issues around it, before we can help our congregations do that. And I didn't want to have people out there alone on their own having to deal with those issues. So I felt like that would probably be a better thing to wait until we could be together again. But let me just say at the beginning that I said this yesterday. Oh, someone was defending their doctoral thesis yesterday, and I said to her, one of the things that I anticipate that will happen at the end of this is that there will be an awful lot of unresolved grief and loss and all of that will come back into our churches. And as a consultant with churches, one of the things that I've discovered is that almost always when I go into a congregation or start working with a pastor whose church is conflicted, 9 times out of 10, the conflict is not around the presenting issue. They're fighting about some silly thing or some maybe important thing, but that's not really where the energy is. 9 times out of 10, if you go back, and even with this person yesterday, if you go back, what you see is there was some significant loss. A lay leader, or died, or a family was killed or it could be a different kind of loss, like for the first time in the history of this church, we have no youth in confirmation, and there's this sort of unresolved grief that sort of blows a church apart. So this is free. You didn't pay for this part of the webinar, or any part of it actually. But I would just say to all of you, be on guard for that, because when we finally do get back together, there's going to be this great sense of joy and relief that we're able to be together again. But there's also going to be all of this unresolved stuff that will come up in the weirdest ways. You'll suddenly look up and your church is fighting about something that they never would have thought about before. It isn't about that. So that was one of the reasons I was hopeful to teach this in the fall. But what I am going to teach in the fall is the title that's on your screen, Church Without Walls, Lessons from COVID-19. And so this is a piece of what I think COVID-19 has taught, or is teaching our churches, is how to do stewardship and how to stay alive financially as a church without walls. So let's talk about that just a little bit. These are some of the lessons that I think we've learned from COVID-19, or that we need to learn, or that we will learn or die. First, this sort of return to the meeting house. This is a very New England thing. The rest of the country doesn't even understand that term. But what we meant by it in the olden days, and some churches still do, is the building is not the church. The building houses the church, but it's not the church. And one of the things that we're learning by being a sort of a disseminated body is that we can still be the church without being able to go to the meeting house. And so there's going to be this great relief of return to the meeting house and being able to be together and hug one another's neck and all that sort of stuff and get back to normal. It is not going to ever be normal again. And what'll happen, I predict, and you're a fool if you are a prophet in these days, there's so many variables, but I predict what's going to happen is that lots of us are going to go back to our favorite restaurants, we're going to go back to our favorite bars, we're going to go back to see our friends again, we're going to go back to church and all that for a little while. And this has gone on, this isolation has gone on long enough that it will have created habits and changed values and expectations and life experiences. And the way that will impact us as churches is, we'll like a restaurant, we'll go back to our favorite restaurants, but after a while we remember how much we kind of liked cooking, and we learned some new skills, and we've missed this dish that we finally perfected, and so we're going to want to cook it and have people over to the house, and so or in New York to our apartments. And that's going to shift. So the restaurants will sort of immediately have an influx of people, and they'll scramble around to try to hire waiters and all that. And if 2 months, I would predict, later, suddenly they're going to find business going down again. And I think this is going to be true. That's a parable about what's going to happen with church. Our young people who have gotten used to worshiping online, and being able to do it when they want to do it and pick what parts of it they want to pick. I know we noticed last Sunday that when the sermon ended in our broadcast, 25 to 30% of the people dropped off. They were done. They got what they needed. And you can't do that in person. So young people are going to really think, I can't make it today. It'll be inconvenient today. I don't feel like getting dressed today. So they're going to worship from home. And they'll either worship with you or they'll worship with someone else. And older people are going to be very anxious, particularly in the fall when flu season comes around. They're going to be very anxious to go back and be around people, or here in Manhattan, to take the subway. So I think the meeting house needs to mean something different. We will not go back to normal. Secondly, technology is our friend. I have been trying to say this for years and teach this in classes and do this as a consultant and do it with my churches. And I feel like I've been beating my head against a wall. But suddenly, like every day, I get dozens of emails and phone calls from people like, oh, I need to, like, yeah. 3 years ago, I tried to convince you, but that you needed to do recurring giving, auto giving, electronic giving, and suddenly now, you need it. But so technology is our friend, and that's not going to stop when when COVID-19, when a vaccine is perfected. That's the future, not just this portion of it. The third thing I wanted to say is we've got to figure out a way, particularly those of us who are older, to learn about connection without skin. We define community as being together. But even 10 years ago, maybe 15 now, a church was trying to get me to come and be their pastor. I was living in Dallas. And as we talked about it as a family, we ultimately decided not to do it. But as we talked about it as a family, my 2 teenage daughters, I said, y'all don't want to leave all your friends behind. And they laughed at me. This was 15 years ago, because they said, Daddy, we're not going to leave them behind. We don't see them every day anyway. We see them on Facebook or social media. And so that generation had already figured out how to create actually functional, healthy community. I know people my age, we keep resisting that, we keep poo-pooing it, we keep pushing back against it, but we're going to die off and they're going to be left behind and they know that you can have community without a skin, face-to-face sort of connection. I have a millennial roommate who FaceTimes and house parties with his friends all the time. They've stayed just as connected through this isolation as they were before, in a different kind of way. But that's just something we who are a bit older have to learn. The fourth thing is that spiritual formation is happening. You may not be teaching Sunday school, you may not be doing Bible study, but it is happening. And it may be happening in a negative way. And we've got to figure out, even after all this is over, how to do spiritual formation virtually. I write a daily devotion called Liberating Word. I've written it for 17 years now. I do not recommend that. It is a terrible taskmaster. But the one thing it has allowed me to do is be in touch with my people every single day with a word of hope or a word of challenge. Now, you've got to figure out a way to do that sort of thing. Maybe not every single day, but a way to stay in touch with your folks and to do spiritual formation, because it's happening in their lives. Whether or not the church is participating in it or not is a different thing. The fifth thing I want to say, and I'm going to talk about this in just a second more, that fundraising is sacred. Now, that may cause the hair on the back of your neck to stand up, and I understand that completely. Because I'm a Southern preacher, and I've always tried to teach my congregations to tithe, to give their generously, and the church ought to have to depend on fundraising. I'm old, and the world has changed, and we've got to change with it. And this is one of the areas we've got to change about, and I'll talk about that in just a second. Finally, sixthly, people give to vision and mission, and that is as true today as it was when we gathered every single week. And so what's happening right now is we're not able to do the kind of mission that we used to do. We can't go down and do the homeless shelter. We can't fix, we can't do that sort of stuff. So we've got to figure out a way to continue to keep vision and mission alive, the vision of the beloved community. And so I had a conversation this week with my peace and justice coordinator, and I said to her, these are some of the issues that are going to come out of this pandemic, I think, and the people who have been living on the margins are the people who are going to be pushed over, off the plate. I think that if we don't leverage this moment in time to get universal health care for every single American, but particularly for the poor and those who are underemployed and those who are self-employed, those who are sort of at the margins. If we don't leverage this to get them health care, then the church will have failed in its moral mandate for this generation. So one of the things I think we've got to articulate is how those kinds of issues, people still care about them, and they need you to give them something to care about other than what they're going to fix for dinner tonight. So vision and mission is still important. And the final thing I want to talk about is that I hope you will never do a pledge drive again. And so let me talk about why that is and why I think that. So the last church that I pastored before I came to New York was the Virginia Highland Church in Atlanta, Georgia. When I went there in March of 2011, and in January and February, they averaged 23 people in attendance. So this may be a church that you can relate to. They had 23 people in attendance. The windows were falling out. They couldn't afford a pastor. So I began there. Well, I was there for the first 5 years for free. They didn't pay me at all. And so at one point, though, when I left, the statistics at the top of the page is what was true when I left 7 years later. They were averaging 206 people in attendance. They had 298 members. That was pretty good. You see a picture of them as they dump out into what became their fellowship hall. I didn't send them into the basement for coffee hour. They were out front. But that number over on the right is the 228 is the number of records of people we had in our database. Now, this is really important. So as you look at this congregation, you can't really tell much about it from this photograph, but it's a really young congregation. I was like the second oldest person in the church. And so we began to attract lots of young people to church as new members. And so what we discovered was to have 206 people on Sunday, I had to have a pool of 2,300 young people to pull from. Now, your church, 60 to 80% of the people who sit in your pews on Sundays have historically been 60 to 80-year-olds. This church didn't have any of those. They had one. So your church is wanting to attract young millennial people. And so this is the bad news that I need to tell you, is they will come to church, but not very often. And that's no comment about their devotion, their love for Jesus, their love for church, their appreciation for you. It is a comment about their lifestyle. They're just not going to come very often. And so this, I think, is the greatest challenge that our traditional churches have. Up to 1960, if I had been a consultant in 1960, and even when I started, if someone had told me they had 400 members, I could have instantly said, then you have about 200 on Sundays, and that would have been really close to accurate. By the year 2000, if you had 400 members, particularly if you had younger members, if you just had older members, if you had 460 to 80-year-olds, this was different. But if you had a significant number of younger people, if you had 400 members, your attendance was about 100. Today, it's about 75, and it's going to very quickly, I think, because of this virus, go down to 25, because people are going to come every other month rather than 2 times a week. Now, again, I'm talking about younger people and maybe older people now who will be afraid of the sort of group gatherings endangering their lives. My latest book was Fishing in a Shallow Sea, and I talk about this. So one thing I want you to notice is The membership of this church hasn't diminished at all. The number of people who love this church and support this church and are committed to this church hasn't changed at all. It is only the frequency of attendance. By going from an average of twice a month to once a month, you cut attendance in half. And if you are depending on the offering plate when it passes, you just cut your offering in half. And so young people who come every other month will consider themselves very devout, very active members of your church. But if they only give in the offering plate, they're not going to be very big financial supporters. And so I had, because of the Virginia Highland Church and attracting all those young people, I had to figure out another way to fund that church, or we never would have been able to hire a pastor. And they, in fact, hired Matt Laney after I left. But the reason they were able to do that was that we stopped having pledge campaigns and started doing auto giving campaigns. So we shifted them, this is now 3 years ago, I've been gone for 3 years, to recurring giving, and it sustained them even after I left, and I suspect is what's sustaining them today. One of the points that's really important if you're going to appeal to millennials, and I think in the sort of post-COVID age, is you've got to separate giving from budget. So historically, the church has had a fall stewardship campaign to underwrite the budget. That not only doesn't work with millennials, with young people, it is offensive to them. If you want to get to demoralize their giving, then connect their giving to paying bills. That is not why they give. They give for meaning and purpose. They give because that's who they are. They give because it's a spiritual value. But if you make their giving about paying your bills, you can kiss it goodbye. They'll give it to someplace else. Now, my parents, who are in their 80s, nearly 90, they write a check every week, and when they miss a week, they write 2 checks, and that's who they are. But there are no more 80, 90-year-olds being born. And so if you're going to get 20, 30, 40, 50-year-olds to give, you've got to figure out what their values are and why it is they give, and budget is not the reason. So base your budget on giving trends and those sorts of things, but not on pledging to the budget. That really is going to be increasingly counterproductive. Now, having said that, you're going to get pushback from the white men in your congregation, the older white men in your congregation. They have this sort of business mentality about running the church, which isn't bad, but in this regard, it's got to change if we're going to reach a future generation. So this is one of the important lessons, is that as you go on this chart from left to right, you go from spenders on the left to givers on the right. What I mean by that is the people on the right represent my parents. They're Methodist, and so they give whether they like their pastor or not. Every 4 to 6 years, they get a new pastor. But it doesn't matter. If they like her, if they like him, they give. If they don't like him, they give. It's because they are givers. That's what they do. And they write a tithe, 10% check to the church, and they drop it in the offering plate. Every week, they miss a week, they put 2 in the plate. That's who they are. God loved them, and thank God for them. And they make up most of our mainline churches, but not for long. And in post-COVID, they may not make up much of them at all. And on the other end, you have people who tend to spend their money, not give their money. Now, I can say that and you can put a judgment on it, or you can say that's what they do. So what you've got to do with them is get them to spend their money on your church. You have to have such compelling mission and vision that they want to spend their money with you. And I have a whole class that I can help do that with, but going from givers to spenders is a future trend, and electronic giving is one of the keys to that, because young people simply don't have checkbooks, for one thing. So one of the ways we did this when I was at the Cathedral of Hope for 2 decades, as we began to attract younger people, we had to find ways to let them spend their money on things they cared about, rather than trying to get them to just drop a check in the offering plate or give us their credit card. So one of the things that everybody cares about is children. And so every year we did this thing called Child of Hope, and the theme was Follow a Star and Find a Child. It was an Advent Christmas theme. And so we would raise $250,000 for the various children's ministries of the church, for health fairs and building a school in Reynosa, Mexico, or an orphanage in the Dominican Republic, or in the left-hand corner, our own children's ministry and all of that. And we would raise huge amounts of money from people who never gave throughout the year, but they would spend their money on this ministry. Now, the key to this being successful is that you don't starve the general fund by diverting money from the general fund to specific causes. So what we did with that specifically was we did a list of all of the things, all the goals we had next year, things we were going to do for children next year, and we raised money for it. But included in that goal were two things. One was our own children's ministry. So this fundraiser funded my children's minister and that whole staff, all those expenses, and it funded the community outreach person who coordinated all the rest of the stuff. Now, we were upfront about it. There was no duplicitous, bait and switch. People knew they were giving money to Child of Hope, and it would fund all of these things. Well, things like the school in Reynosa, Mexico, we didn't spend a dime on it, not a dime. But that money that we took up funded the coordinator who got Home Depot to donate the materials, got all of the sorts of things that made it happen, that ended up not costing us really any money except for his staff position, which would have been funded otherwise in the general fund. There's a lot more I can say about this, but as you begin to do fundraising, which you're going to have to do a whole lot more of, as you begin to appeal to a generation of people who will spend their money on things they care about, on their causes, on things that they can have impact. That's a major word for millennials, things they can have impact on. As you appeal to them, you're going to have to do fundraisers that will do that. And so as a result of that, my consulting company has started this new thing called the Giving System that will help churches figure out how to set up fundraising campaigns. And I push this shamelessly because it's free. so you can, if you are interested in it, I can help send you the information about it. But it is because churches have got to learn to do fundraising again, because we're going to try to appeal to a generation for whom that's important. The other thing that I want to just point out is this chart. Notice that only 2% of bills and payments and purchases are made by checks. I was in Trader Joe's one day and had to write a check because I had left my wallet, and I had my passport, unfortunately, in my backpack. So I was able to write a check. And I said, as I wrote it, I said, this was several years ago. I haven't seen my checkbook in a couple of years. I said to the cashier, I'm not even sure how I sign my checks, whether it's with my whole name or with my initial. And she said to me, I know, honey, the only place I ever write a check anymore is to my church. Now, that was funny, and we laughed, and I told her that I was a pastor. But it is also an indictment that this is one of the ways in which the church is still doing business in a primitive way. And so COVID gives us the opportunity to change this, to become aligned with the way the rest of the world is already living. So I want to suggest to you that if you want to, you can order new offering plates from me that will hypnotize people into giving you their credit card number. No, I'm just kidding. But I do think we need new offering plates. My youngest daughter attended university not too far from my church in Atlanta. And so she would come occasionally to church. And one day she said to me, Daddy, you all say every Sunday, no matter who you are, where you are on life's journey, you're welcome here. But that's not true. And I said, what do you mean that's not true? And she said, every week when the offering plate passes, I can't give. And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, I have a debit card and I have a credit card. I started to say to her, you have my credit card because you're in college, but I didn't say that. I said, I have a credit card, I have a debit card, but I don't have a check. And I never have cash, so I can't give. And I thought, there I am talking about this, and here I have a millennial daughter who I've excluded from this act of worship, because we insist that you're welcome to give if you give the way your grandparents did, with a check or with cash. So we've got to figure out another way to do this. And COVID gives us the excuse to convert how we're doing this. Let me just give you as an illustration. KERA on the left, that was the NPR station in Dallas, Texas. I did a monthly editorial on there. My daughters thought that Sam Baker, who was the news director there, was like their uncle because they listened to him every single morning on the way to school. And so I loved KERA. But what I hated was that 4, 5 often times a year, they would do these campaigns, fundraising campaigns that drove me crazy. I finally said to Sam, surely there's got to be a better way to do this. And he said, no, we actually are one of the best funded NPR stations in the country. And it is like 5 or 6 weeks out of the year, I just couldn't listen to them. It just, this begging for money drove me crazy. Moved to Atlanta in 2011, and their WABE, their NPR station, we started listening to. So we got there in March of 2011. And after a couple of months, I said to Bill, my partner, like, we missed their spring fund drive. And then we realized they didn't have a summer fund drive. And I said, so how are they funding themselves? And we got to the fall, and their fund drive was going to be 4 days, not 2 weeks like KERA, 4 days. And so I said, is this a really small station? And so Bill actually did the research, and the budget for the 2 NPR stations were fairly close to the same. And so I tried to study how they were doing it so differently. And this was the secret that they knew that we must learn. KERA did a yearly pledge campaign, and WABE did a yearly sustaining member campaign. And what I mean by that is WABE would ask you, they would never even mention money. So actually you had to research what their budget was and how much money they wanted. But what they were asking you to do was to join as a sustaining member, to become a sustaining member of WABE. And what that meant was you called up or you went online and you pledged $10 a month. So what they discovered, and I talked to their development person, what they discovered was $10 a month sustaining membership was worth way more than KERA's giving them a pledge of $150. Now, it sounds like they're taking $30 less, but the truth of the matter is that KERA may or may not get that pledge fulfilled, and WABE, because it is a sustaining membership, it absolutely will be fulfilled. In the summer, when people go away and aren't listening anymore, they're still paying their membership. And not only that, but when the year turned around, KERA had to start at 0 and start working to get you to pledge. WABE already had a base of sustaining membership. And so they just had to get a few more members to deal with the attrition, and they had to get their members, like me, to increase their giving. Now, until this isolation, I was still giving to WABE 3 years later. Haven't been gone for 3 years, but I was still giving to them. And this year, I'm not even sure I've stopped that. I can't remember, but I joined in New York City radio station, WNYC, because I'm listening to them while I've been at home. So I've only changed it they've got 3 years worth of giving from me, even though I've been moved away, have moved away. So the difference in this is really remarkable. Sustaining members. So instead of getting your people to pledge toward a budget next year, what you really need to work on is getting them to become sustaining members. And the way they do that is by electronic giving. And this will work with young people too, I guess is the point of this slide. So recurring giving campaign, this is how you need to do this. First, get your leaders, all of the leaders of the church, to move from pledging to filling out a recurring giving card. It's just as easy. I mean, it's no different. The card can look exactly the same, except they give you a credit card number, a debit card number, or an automatic check withdrawal number, or a voided check, and you can do the rest. And so they're moving from one to the other. They are then sustaining members forever. The second thing is to optimize recurring giving on your website. So you go to your website right now and people can give a donation. And that's obvious. And so probably people are doing that, at least with our church in New York. More people are doing that than ever before right now. Great. But what will pay long-term dividends well into the future is if the most obvious option is to sign up for recurring giving there, so that every month, every week, however often, they automatically are giving you through recurring giving. Now, it can even be less than their monthly gift, and ultimately the church will be rewarded financially for recurring giving as opposed to donations. Put a link to that recurring giving page in every email that you send out, every newsletter, everything. There's a link where people can go to that site to give. It doesn't have to, you don't have to harass people about it. You don't have to talk about it all the time, but it's just as there, so that it just is one of those things that people begin to do. Set up systems to express thanks. That's the great thing with recurring giving. So I am a recurring giver to my church. I give, I think I'll give once a month. And in Atlanta, I gave twice a month. But every time my recurring giving goes in, I get an email from myself thanking myself for giving. So you craft a really effective email that automatically goes every time someone gives a gift. Pledges, we never did that for people's pledge. We could never do that for weekly offerings, but because this is all electronic, you can do that, and you can change them up, and you can add, additional campaigns and things in that thank you. So set up systems to express thanks. So every membership class in Atlanta with Virginia Highland, when people came to membership class, there wasn't a pledge card, which most churches have. There was a recurring giving card. We didn't give them that option. They couldn't make a pledge. They filled out a recurring giving card. And so that's the way we just set it up, because eventually we wanted to give away 100% of the weekly offering, because we wanted the budget to be completely underwritten by recurring giving. Make it easy for older members to give, and this is worth the price of the webinar by itself. This is how you do that. You get your older members have been paying you by check week after week after week, month after month after month, year after year after year. You have all the information you need. So you take one of their checks, and probably you're already making copies of the checks every week anyway, but you copy it, and you, not them, fill out the card and the form, and which I'll show you in just a second. And all they have to do is come and sign it. So that's one of the ways to do the older giving, and I'll talk about it just a little bit more in a second. Automatically renew recurring giving. That is, some churches, some systems actually, some databases force you to start over every year. And if your system forces you to do that, just pay somebody to go in and re-input it. So you don't ask people if they want to continue their recurring giving. You ask people if they want to increase it. You just assume that they're going to continue to give to the church. So you don't have to start over, unlike KERA in Dallas. You don't have to start over every year with brand new pledges, as if people have to recommit to loving God or giving to the church, or being a Christian. You assume they're going to continue to be Christian. They're going to continue to love God. They're going to continue to give to the church. You assume that until they tell you, and the minute they tell you, you stop. But unless they tell you, you continue you just continue the recurring giving. And instead of asking them to sign up every year, you ask them to increase every year. And that's the final thing, is create a step-up campaign tied to vision and mission, not to the budget. So each year, you're going to need to ask people to increase. So you may say, our goal for this year is to hire a full-time children's minister. And to do that, we're going to increase our budget by 3%. So we're asking those of you that are automatic givers to consider increasing your automatic gift by 3%, to step up to this. And so that really is the point. It isn't that you're never going to have to do stewardship again. What you really should be doing is year-round stewardship, but you're not going to do pledge campaigns. So this is the automatic draft form. So you fill it out. You don't ask the older people to fill it out. And I'll tell you why. I'd have this problem. There's a blank check. If you look at the bottom of it, I have no clue what of those numbers is my account number and what of those numbers is the routing number. I have no clue. But my treasurer knows, or my accountant knows, so have him or her fill out the form. Don't ask your older members to fill it out, and just ask you fill it out, because they write a check every week. You know the amount, you know the frequency, you know the routing number, you know the account number, you know the address and the name and address on the check. You fill it out, and then you have an older member of your church, a longtime member, maybe your treasurer, call all of those folks and say, Ms. Smith, one of the things that we're doing is signing the entire church up for recurring giving. And so since you give regularly, what we'd like to ask is if you'll allow us just to automatically deduct it, sort of like you pay your Medicare supplement. And that way the church knows it's going to be there every week, and you don't have to worry about writing a check. And if you miss a Sunday, you don't have to worry about whether and we'll just take care of it for you, just like Medicare supplement takes care of it for you. So every older person in your church is already doing this because they can't sign up for a Medicare supplement, just like no young person can sign up to join a gym in this country without automatic recurring membership. So, but you've got to facilitate the older people being able to do this, because it really is complicated for someone my age to figure this out. So you have to do this. This isn't a picture of after church at the church in Virginia Highland. So I just want to walk you through this really quickly. Over on the left, the couple that is circled in blue, the woman is a deacon of the church, but they go to Michigan every summer where they have a lake house on Lake Michigan. And so if they weren't recurring givers, we wouldn't have gotten a donation from them during the summer. The pink circle above them, the lesbian couple with twin children. You see the two kids there. They were there one Sunday, and I said to them, well, thank God you're here from college, because the only time your mothers come to church is when you come home. And one of the women hit me on the shoulder and said, yeah, but our check comes every week, doesn't it? And she was right. She was a recurring giver, a very generous recurring giver. And she was one of our major donors, but not one of our major attenders. To the right of that, there's a woman circled in blue. I did her wedding, and she was going to finish school. She decided she wasn't going to live apart from her husband, so she moved to Chicago. And for 3 years, until I left, so they may still be doing it. She and her husband continued to donate to the church because they were recurring givers. Above her, the guy is a realtor, but every Sunday he spends in the mountains and is only there on special occasions, but he's a recurring giver. The people closest to you are the children of the president of the congregation and her husband, and they spend the summer in Puerto Rico. And she is the CFO of a major corporation, and again, major givers. But fortunately, they're recurring givers. And so just like a quick survey of all of that right there, half of my budget would almost have gone away if these folks were not all recurring givers. So I hope you'll get that. This is a QR code. Put it in your bulletin. Your young people can hold their phones up to it, and it takes them to the donation page on your website, and they can sign up to become recurring givers. You can also put that. And so this is the database. Notice the donation frequency. I don't think that's prominent enough, but this was Virginia Highlands. They were using Breeze database. And so we asked them about recurring giving. There are lots of companies out there that can help you do that. Tidely is just the one that I happen to put it here. I'm not recommending them. I can give you some recommendations. Tidely is not a bad one. But not only do they help your churches do recurring giving, text giving, automatic giving, but they send emails out to your congregation, reminding them, that today is Earth Day, or, there was a blizzard in your area and maybe you didn't make it to church last week. And so, but you can still financially support the church. They do a good job with that. The bottom line is we can be on ostrich and stick our head in the sands, or we can figure out how to do this more effectively. Susan, can you hear this? Can you hear this?
I'm not hearing anything.
Oh, okay. All right, sorry. It was a video. So this is sort of the final thing I want to say is, so for folks who become recurring givers, auto givers, they get worried they don't put anything in the offering plate when it passes. There are two ways to sort of do that. You can put things in you can send it to them, or you can put things in the pew racks that people can pull out and put in the offering plate instead of their tithes, which has already electronically gone in. The best church that's, and I know of that does this, is Painesville, Ohio, United Church of Christ. They have $50 bills stuck in there, at least that's what it looks like, in their pew racks. And on the back side of the $50 bill, it says, I'm an auto giver. And so you drop the $50 bill in the offering plate. The other thing that churches do with this is they ask people to bring their cash, their change, their dollar bills, whatever, and in the offering, all the dollar bills or all the $5 bills or all this cash goes to a specific mission or ministry. Some of them, it's different every single week. They honor a different mission or ministry every single week. And so the cash in the offering plate goes to that. And so people can give there. So those are my email address. That's my email address at Hartford Seminary. The one below that is my technical guy, who can help you figure out all the technology about databases or recurring giving, or particularly your website, getting it up to date. That's his specialty, and you'd be much better served emailing him to ask technical questions than you would be emailing me, who would then have to email him and ask him. I've done told you more than I know, but I would like to spend a few minutes at least answering any questions that you might have. So Susan, I'll turn it back to you.
Sure. So I'm going to go through the questions that I'm seeing in the chat, and if you have more, please go ahead and add them. So Philip Jackson is asking, have you ever used gamification or heard of it being used in church fundraising?
Yes, and especially, I think it's especially effective with younger givers, with a congregation of younger givers. I think that's a great way to do that, or to do it with the young people in your congregation. What I would suspect is that the older congregants would find it offensive. And so if your church is like the average vintage church in America and is 60 to 70% people above the age of 60, you might need to target market that within the congregation. But making giving a game is perfect for young people and offensive to older people, just like tying it to the budget is offensive to young people and perfect for old white guys like me.
Okay. A couple people are asking about the QR code. Do you find it to be effective? And they don't know people who use them. These are both people who say they're in their 30s.
Yeah. Yes, that is right. They were once very, very effective. They are now significantly less effective. But if it's all you can do is to put a QR code in your bulletin or on your offering envelopes, young people will use them. They use them sometimes begrudgingly, but they almost all have smartphones and almost always have that mechanism on their smartphones. So it's better than nothing, but they are both right. It is decreasingly effective, and that is correct. But it doesn't cost you anything. You can create a QR code for free and put it in and just tie it to your donation page on your website. So it is better than nothing, and maybe it's a step in the right direction.
Great. Someone asked, what was the first complete giving system you showed that was free? They were looking for it and couldn't find it in a Google search.
That's because it is brand new. We have just created it. So email me and I'll send you a link to it. Because literally we created it during this virus because it was just like, it was needed, and it was needed for churches. So let me just say a word about that. I know, okay, I'm going to get crucified for this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Most of the UCCs use Vanco. Many other mainline denominations use Vanco. It is the most expensive out there. There are lots of other options. that are much, much less expensive. Like, for example, my church, I think, uses Giving Fire. They charge a monthly fee, just a flat monthly fee, but they don't skim off the top. Vanco charges you a per transaction fee, and they take a percentage of your donation. They take the highest percentage. Their credit card transaction fee is about as high. And so all of our churches are using what they're comfortable with, what they've been using for years. But since Vanco initially came out, there have been 1,000 new companies out there doing it much more efficiently and much lower cost. So if you've just been relying on Vanco, I'd suggest you either renegotiate with them or you find a better system. And I prefer systems that don't take a portion of what people give.
So a few other people asking about QR codes, and then what is the recommended platform for giving? PayPal, other?
So PayPal is certainly one of them. Again, the percentage of PayPal is higher than lots of others. And the reason for that is that PayPal is a for-profit company. So they have to, on top of the credit card, so you pay the credit card fee and you pay, and PayPal takes a percentage. So it just is more expensive. It works. People have PayPal accounts. People pay for lots of things that way. I'm not saying don't use them. I'm just saying they are more expensive. And so what we have worked at is giving people every option, but trying to educate them and move them toward the option that is least expensive to the church. And several of these folks, I think Tidely, for example, the one and PushPay, and there's several out there that give people the option of paying the 2.5% or the 2.75% that it's going to cost the church when you use your credit card. Now, again, there's a whole debt thing there, and I get that, and that's another whole conversation to have. But like, I do not know where my checkbook is. I have no clue. I barely know who we bank with. And so I pay for absolutely everything with my credit card, and a credit card that I get frequent flyer miles for. And then every single month, I pay it off completely. In fact, Bill would have just had a fit, and now he'd come back to haunt me if I ever paid credit card interest. But, you know, that's just the way we, as modern people, live. My daughters, I took them down when they were 13 years old to the bank to open a bank account. They have never, they're 27 and 28 now, they have never had a checkbook. They have paid for everything using mostly their debit card, so not using a credit card, but not with a checkbook. So look around, because the fees will eat you alive, and you can certainly negotiate them.
So here's a really important question. Please talk about building trust when the elderly, the poor, and others do not trust the internet with financial transactions.
Yeah, I do think that is one of the problems. The reality is, though, and especially post COVID-19, the reality is they have all, including the elderly, including my father, who is the grumpiest old man you'll ever know, who insists on writing a check and driving it by and dropping it in, has had to pay his bills online. And so the circumstances have really changed that. And yes, there is, you know, internet fraud and all that sort of stuff, but it is actually such a minor thing now that I think it really is sort of a moot point. And churches should be concerned about making sure that their website is secure and all those sorts of things. And again, Jim at Agile Tech can help you make sure that that's all true. But I do think the circumstances of being isolated for the last 2 months, it has changed people like my father's giving pattern and bill paying pattern. So we can leverage that and move into the future, or we can continue to sort of, you know, live out, let them live out of the past. Again, every one of them is paying their Medicare supplement electronically.
So I'm going to ask one last question, and we do have a couple others, but if you didn't get your question answered, you can go ahead and email Mike or Jim. So the last question, and then I'll just do a little quick wrap up, is how do you report giving to finance committees when it's happening, quote unquote, behind the scenes? She's thinking that folks who are used to counting will feel out of touch.
Yes, and so I mean, I think you're right about that. And there's, so what happens is when you do it electronically, if you have a good system, even a decent system, it should automatically connect to your database and the donor page. So it really does take out some of the manual work of inputting. It increases accuracy and effectiveness. And if you have a decent database, which if you don't have, you should have, get Breeze, like the wind. If you don't have a database, it's $50 a month. I make no money off them. I shouldn't have owned stock in them, but it's the cheapest, most effective one out there. They're much better ones. They're just more expensive. But for the average size church, Breeze will do the job. So people can give automatically through Breeze, and it automatically reports it and then exports that through QuickBooks and all that. So, so what ends up happening is the counting team ends up counting the cash and the checks. There'll be fewer and fewer checks, but there'll still be cash. And what I think is really valuable is every week commit to giving 100% of your offering away. You know, underwrite your church budget with recurring giving, but give 100% of your offering away. So this week it goes to the food bank. Next week it goes to the SPCA. The next week it goes to, and so what happens is you take up the offering, and 100% of the offering today goes to the food bank. So you take it up, and the next week have the people from the food bank there in church, and during the announcements, have them come up and hand them a check. And so, but imagine if you're a first-time visitor and you hear the pastor say, we're giving away 100% of our offering today. You're like, wow. Now, the truth of the matter is you can do that only because you have 100% of your budget underwritten by recurring giving. So that way, what happens is the counters are actually counting an offering that is going to be given away. And that really is kind of an exciting thing. And you have some folks in your church, like at one church that I was the pastor of, had a woman in the church who gave $50,000 a year to a women's abuse hotline. In fact, she started it, she gave a huge amount of money. So once a year, we took a special offering for it. She gave her $50,000. The church gave another $5,000. The next week, we gave them a check for $55,000. Now, no one knew that one person had given most of that except me. But imagine you have visitors and your church just gave a $55,000 check to help combat abuse. I mean, there are ways to do this. If we listen to Jesus, who said, "Be as cunning as a serpent, but as innocent as a dove. Have integrity and ingenuity. Be congruent to the mission and vision the church has adopted, but be smart about it. We can do our work in smarter ways, and I hope that will be one of the things that comes out of this pandemic.